Now, another author that I researched is an author named William Paluth. He wrote a book called Composition Made Easy. The only problem is, first of all, it's out of print. And second of all, he wrote it for painters. And I've known about this book for a long time, and I thought, it's out of print. It's got some really good points in it. He actually went through 16 compositional techniques that he researched from master painters. And I thought, I'd really love to bring this into the photographic world. So I got permission from his publisher to quote from that book. And that's the next section you're going to see is some of those things here. William Paluth. Okay, he talks about grouped shape composition. This is in South Africa. Now, there's a lot of things going on here that make, in my humble opinion, it's my photograph, I think it's a really great photograph because it has a lot of elements. It has color, there's wind on the water, there's texture there. I almost got run over when I took the photograph because in South Africa the cars are coming from the other direction and I didn't look to see that there was a car coming right in my lane, and I stepped into it and it went by close enough to feel the wind. And if I'd moved forward just a little bit, I wouldn't be here telling you this story. Anyway, group shape composition. So what we have here is a bunch of different shapes that work together. So that photograph has at least three, it breaks down into three different shapes. You have overlapping clouds on the left that overlap also with the mountains on the left, and those overlap with the mountains on the right. So you have at least three shapes working together. This is something that William Paluth made a note about, that many of, again, the classical painters use this technique. It brings about interest. And these, again, are things that work. How come they work exactly like that? I'm not even sure I could tell you. I'm just kind of relaying to you what I've found does work, and you can try these things out for yourself. Patterns. The eye seems to love patterns. We love to find things in patterns. There's a harmony, there's a sense of balance there. But there's something even more powerful than a pattern, and that is if you break the pattern. And in this case, this is at the d'Orsay Museum in Paris. Who was just in Paris? Yeah, did you go to the d'Orsay? Okay, it's a beautiful museum. This used to be a train station. In fact, it's pretty much the model for the train station in Hugo, if you saw that movie, right? There's the clock. And you can look out the clock and see Paris on the other side. It's really cool. But look at the geometry here and look at the patterns. It's just all a bunch of patterns. But that happens to be my wife. She's standing where she is on purpose. So somebody who left me a comment recently about my book said, shouldn't she be right in the middle? No, because it doesn't, first of all, it wouldn't break the pattern up. Because your eye goes, it's interesting, your eye kind of sees the pattern, and then there's this sort of broken part of the pattern. And there's all sorts of interesting things that you can do. Whenever you see a pattern, look for how you can break it up. Look for how your subject, in this case, you could move the subject. In this case, my wife was actually art directing the shot and telling me what to do. But you usually go the other way around as the photographer. You're usually the director and tell your subject where to stand. And if they're standing in a way that's just right smack somewhere in the middle where it's not going to change the pattern, have them move around. Now, we all know, here's the deal. The fun of photography is you can take a lot of photographs of the same thing and try maybe 5 or 10 or 15 different compositional techniques within one photographic setting. And you can do that and later go home and go back to your processing and decide which one really pops. I don't always know. You know, sometimes I know for sure, that's it, Mark. You really got it. It's in the can. That's beautiful. But a lot of times I'll surprise myself, and if I have that variety of different angles and compositional formats, I've got a lot to choose from. that gives you a big latitude of how you're going to tell that story. This next one, the golden ratio proportions. And I'm going to have to do some explaining on this one because there's a lot to it. The golden ratio, you can see there's a grid line there. And if you look at it, it's different than the points of thirds. It's got a different grid to it. If you process, by the way, with Photoshop or Lightroom, they have these grid lines built into it. In fact, you can change the grids in your cropping tool. You've got thirds, you've got the golden proportions, and they have 4 or 5 other ones that you can use when you're cropping your images to get things kind of lined up the way you want. This particular photograph, I visualized. I thought it was going to be the cover of the book, and I decided that not to use it on the cover. But the visualization that I had was I wanted sunset, I wanted the model on the beach, and I wanted her reflection in the sand. So it sounds great to visualize that, but how do you get reflection in the sand when sand is usually dry? And you can see the waves are pretty far back there. So I had to pick a point where the waves had just been over, but they had receded, and had her stand there because I didn't want her dealing with a wave coming in while I was photographing her. And I wanted it to be in shallow enough water that you could see the reflection. So I took a lot of different images. This was with a Sony mirrorless, fairly recently. But there's a whole different grid that you're working with. Now, the golden ratio is probably one of the earliest compositional techniques that goes back to at least as far as the Parthenon was designed with the golden ratio in mind. And it basically has to do with a mathematical formula, which I'm not going to go into right now. I do bring some more elucidation to this in the book, but I don't want to bore you with it at the moment. There's math behind it, but then what's interesting about it is it's really in nature, it's seen over and over again, like the spiral of a nautilus shell. It's also, you see it in plants and pine cones, and even in the spiral of a hurricane. Nature seems to love this ratio. And what's interesting is there's been studies done on beauty in terms of a beautiful face. And those proportions are absolutely what we all consider beautiful. It's like there's some sort of a classic thing that the eye does when you see those proportions. It just makes you feel like there's a sense of natural harmony there. Something is clicking, in other words. It's kind of like with music, you know? If you play a chord in a guitar and you strum it properly, there's a sense of harmony. But you move your fingers around, not so much. Okay. This next is just another example. This is from another photographer, Jake Garn, using those lines. So where those intersections occur are called golden points. And you can line up using the golden points, your subject. And in this case, we have both the subject on a golden line there, and then the horizon, you notice, is on another one. And those are really handy compositional tools because you can line things up and you get a good feeling of balance. In this photograph, there's just a feeling of enough space. The subject is not crowded. There's a lot of space over on this side. There's a feeling, there's also leading lines in this photograph. So by the way, many compositions have more than one of these tools. Just like cooking a meal, you can use more than just one technique, It's not just a matter of frying an egg. You can also make an omelet with eggs and cheese and mix other things in there. So using these compositional techniques, you'll find an overlap. And in this case, we have the overlap of the leading lines and the golden ratio. Okay, here's another one from William Palouse. He talks about the S composition. And that means just what it says. It's a compositional technique if you find it, and you don't find it every single day. But you could go to Central Park and follow the river. You'll find it there. This happens to be in Wyoming at the Grand Teton National Park, and that's the Snake River. What the S curve does is it can lead your eye to where you want the viewer to go. In this case, to the main one, which is called the Grand Teton. So your eye just kind of naturally follows that path, and you see what you want the viewer to see. And of course, it's enhanced by the amazing cloud formations there that add a lot of pop to it. But this is a fun one. Again, you're not going to see it every day. Many of these ones I'm going to show you in a minute, you may not see all the time. But if you're prepared, chance favors the prepared mind. And you know, what these formats are like is your vocabulary as a photographer. Joe McNally, fantastic photographer, I've interviewed him. He talks about the language of light. And he really urges people to understand the language of light. What is that light doing? In composition, I kind of call it, it's the same thing. It's a vocabulary. And if you only have 5 words in your vocabulary, you're going to have a really limited conversation with someone. But if you have 30, 40, 50, in this case 83, terms and ideas that you can use, you can really broaden how you want to express your photograph. In my course, The Secrets to Amazing Photo Composition from the Masters, you're going to learn that every picture tells a story, but how do you tell yours? You're going to learn composition secrets that the master artists have used for centuries. You're going to learn how to pull your viewer into the center of interest of your photo, and how to use contrast to build excitement. What are the many different ways to frame your image? And how mood lines can affect your photo? Hey, what happens when you use the wrong mood to tell your story? And what really happens when you use the right one? I give you 83 composition techniques and how you can use them like a great chef uses recipes to create amazing meals. Jump on board with this course right now. You're going to love it.